Good morning, everybody, and welcome along to today's Tide Masterclass, how to choose the right type of funding for your business. This is now the 24th Masterclass in total since March and the 6th in our September series of how to start a small business. For September, we've changed things slightly. We're now doing 2 masterclasses a week, each running at around 30 minutes and giving you a how-to guide of how to start a new business. Because of the time constraints, we won't be doing a Q&A at the end of this session, but if you have any questions, do send them in to me at the email that I'll put into the chat room a little later on, and we'll get those questions answered and sent back to you as soon as possible. Really pleased to see a good number of people watching us live this morning, but if you're watching this on our YouTube channel or on our on-demand service, great to see you too, and thank you for finding us on YouTube. My name is Kuhn Hawker. I'm the event manager here at Tide, and for those of you who are maybe new to Tide and what we do, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of our services. So we are the fastest growing online business current account provider in the UK. We currently have over 200,000 members, and our aim is to provide our members with a service that saves them both time and money when it comes to their business banking. We're brilliant for SMEs, for startups and for freelancers, and as there are no credit checks or startup or monthly fees, this allows you to even try us out alongside your current business account and see where we can save you time and money in a direct comparison. The sign-up process, really simple, takes about 5 or 10 minutes. You'll receive your sort code and account number after that time, so you can start your banking straight away. And a few days later, you'll receive your fantastic Tide card through the post. The app itself, really easy to set up as well, and there's a huge amount of in-app products that will make your banking life a lot easier. A couple of my favorites is our auto categorization tool, so you can see exactly where the money has gone and when it went there. And you can also split your one account into 4 sub-accounts, so you can have a sub-account for your tax, for your event spend, for your marketing, or for whatever it is that will help you make your banking life easier. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit later on about how easy it is to set up an account with Tide and become a member, and how you can stay up to date with us through our social channels. We're going to move on to the masterclass itself now, and I'm really honoured and pleased to say that we have George Bevis with us, who is the founder of Tide, and I'm going to let George introduce himself. Good morning, George.
Hey, Kieran, thanks very much for having me along.
Pleasure.
So, would it be helpful for me to explain to the audience a little bit about my background?
That would be fantastic, George. Yes, please.
So, Kieran rightly mentions that I am indeed the founder of Tide. It's not the only thing I've done. Pretty old that I have had lots of other business experiences and failures before. Tide was my biggest success and the one in which I raised the most money, hence I'm giving this talk today. But before Tide, several years before Tide, I built a retail business which used to buy and sell stuff on the internet. It was a massive failure and lost hundreds of thousands of pounds of our investors' money, and achieved nothing in return. Along the way, I learnt quite a bit about how to raise money and indeed how to deploy it, albeit badly. But I also learnt the first message of the first slide that that I think Kuhn's about to put on the screen now. So the first message is that before you go too far in building your business, you should think really hard about whether or not you are absolutely certain that there is a business to build. Most entrepreneurs who fail make the mistake of building a business too early. And the implication of that, if you build a business before you are as sure as you can be about your idea, is that most likely you will be making a mistake. Failure is the default outcome for startups after all. And that means that if you invest your own money, you'll probably lose it. And even worse than that, if you invest other people's money, you'll probably be losing that as well. And if you're like me, you probably feel worse about losing other people's money than you do about losing your own money. So you need to be really careful. And I think as a simple list of things to be as sure as you can be before you launch your business, thinking about whether or not you've proven the following hypotheses as cheaply as possible first. So what proposition is it do customers really want? And to what extent have you asked them about that proposition? Have you put it in front of them and got their feedback on it? If you're really sure that customers really will want this product if they know about it, there's still a question about how you're going to make them know about it and what's that going to cost you. Now, of course, there are some businesses that grow virally, as they put it, for free, but actually that's pretty rare. Most businesses are not like that. Most businesses require you to put some effort and spend some money to get every additional customer. Tide wins lots of customers for free, but it does also find it necessary to buy advertising to get customers as well. So what's it going to cost you to get customers? And also, once you've got that customer, how much margin are you going to make over the lifetime of each customer? A very useful ratio is to look to make 3 times as much margin over the lifetime of winning a customer as you are going to expend in winning that customer in the first place. Now, remember, we're talking here about margin, which is different from revenue. Margin is the difference between the revenue that you make on a customer and the cost of serving that customer. So it is, if you like, your variable bit of profit. But you want to be sure that, on the assumption that you are somehow able to cover your overheads and your fixed costs, at least on the extra customer that you win, that customer will maybe be making of the order of 3 times as much as it costs to recruit them in the first place. So if you know to a reasonable level of confidence that you've got a good proposition, that you've tested with customers without actually building your business as much as possible, you've got some idea of what it's going to cost to win customers and what your margins might look like, then maybe you're in a position to go and start growing your business. But before that point, I'm really not sure that you necessarily are. Good. Perhaps you'd like to move to the next slide. It's also worth noting that if you do take other people's money, there are lots and lots of downsides to doing that. In the first place, you just won't be able to get their money as what I call equity investors, meaning people who buy shares in your business, unless you have some sort of storyline for why this business might be worth more than £50 million in 5 to 10 years. The reason for that is that for people who buy shares, they expect that when they buy shares in a very young business, that most of those businesses will go bust, and they need to make a return of, tens of times of their money occasionally for the whole portfolio of their investments to work. And they're just not going to be able to make that sort of a return unless each business has at least a chance of having a valuation north of £50 million in a number of years' time. So if your business is always going to stay small, I'm afraid nobody with any sense is going to buy shares in it. The second part is your time. Your time matters. And it is very time consuming raising funding. I've said here, it could be half your time for 1 to 3 months if you're going out to individuals, rich individuals, often known as business angels. And more than that, maybe 4 to 8 months if you're going out to venture capitalists. It's a very slow process. And let's say it succeeds. An interesting fact about being an entrepreneur is I think everyone goes in the first time they take other people's money, and maybe in the first time that you take external investment, you might only give away perhaps 20-25% of the business. And so you still feel like, brilliant, I've still got 3/4 of my business left. But the truth is, at the end of this process, it's very likely that you will have taken successive rounds of investment, particularly because your existing investors will be putting some pressure on you to grow this business as much as you can, and you can only do that by taking more investment later on, giving away more of a share of the business. And that means that at the end of the journey, it's very, very rare for founders to end up with more than 20% of a business. That means that for the economics to go round, you need to believe that in going down this path, your business will be worth at least 5 times more than it would have been if you kept 100% of this business. And that's not always the case. When your staff know that you are not the 100% owner of a business, inevitably and quite reasonably from their perspective, your authority is diminished from being the 100% owner to being a bit less than that. And when you're having tough discussions with different teammates, they're going to know that, and that's going to make discussions even harder than they might otherwise have been. The truth is that all investors add some form of stress whenever they contact you because you care about what they think. And quite a lot of investors add more than the minimum amount of stress because they just aren't very good at holding back from asking unhelpful questions at the wrong times and so forth. Sometimes investors destroy businesses. This is not as uncommon as it may sound. They don't destroy businesses particularly out of greed. They're more likely to do it out of incompetence, but it is much more common than you may imagine. They're very likely to insist that your business has a board. And the nature of boards is that boards exist to give investors the sense that the business has been somehow de-risked by a load of wise individuals giving their opinions. But the truth is, no matter how wise they may be about the outside world, they typically know very little about what's going on in your business. And so they really are not qualified to, most of the time, to tell you what to do. And very often they will not be adding great value to your business at all. And of course, as I mentioned before, the default outcome for startups is failure. So you will likely lose those people's money. Given all those facts, much as it can be very useful and indeed sometimes essential to take other people's money, as indeed it was in Tide, where we've taken an enormous amount of venture capital over the years in building that business, because there's no other way to build a business like Tide other than by taking venture capital. In the main, in the early days, and certainly before you've proven out what you are thinking of doing, it's much better to try and look for ways to fund proving out what you're doing without giving away shares to anyone. Now, there are various different ways you might think about doing that. If you can get debt, then debt is always great, but debt is really hard to get. You may well be able to get small amounts of debt, a few £1,000s here and there from different sources. And if you can get it, that is very often a great thing to do. You don't want to be paying huge amounts for it, obviously, but you're a small business owner. You're quite sensible enough to work out not to pay a lot of money for debt, but paying an amount between 10 and 20% per annum to buy a piece of equipment which you think is going to double your revenue in 3 months may well be an obviously great deal. And of course, if you're a limited company and the company goes bust, then it's the limited company that owed the money, not you, and you can walk away. So debt is great if you can get it, but you can probably only get small amounts of it until you are a proven business with many months of revenues and potentially profits behind you, at which point it becomes more and more available to get substantial debt in the tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds, and of course ultimately in the millions, but usually not available for very small businesses. If you're tempted to take debt by using a personal guarantee on your house for an amount of money which would cause you to lose your house, I would encourage you to pause and think about whether or not that really is the right level of risk to be taking. I think for almost any business, until it's very big and very well established, the risk of the business going fut is always going to be more than 10%. I mean, this year we've just had a pandemic, and a whole load of businesses which would normally have seemed completely bulletproof this year sadly will have expired. And it will be the case along the way that some people are going to lose their homes as a result, and their families can be in a very tough spot. So really watch out for that. So much better instead in the early days to look at some other routes, particularly if you don't have access to unsecured debt, think about being a contractor somewhere. If you can get somebody to pay you a day rate of £500 a day or £700 a day, that's a lot of money. It's very unlikely that you need to spend all of that money on your family. So much more likely instead that you can hive off a bit of it, and bear in mind, of course, that money comes in pre-income tax. So if you can be bringing in £500 a day and you're paying someone else £200 to do some of the work for you on your startup, you can still keep £300 a day for yourself, and that's not a bad way to fund yourself. And you can go on like that for months or even years without any great downside. Also consider using grants. Grants are typically hard to get for startups. It's not worth expending more than a few hours thinking about whether or not you're likely to be able to get grants. I think in the resources for this talk, there is a list of grants. It's worth looking on the internet to see if there might be some grants that are available for you. Be aware that grant processes also can be very slow. They might take months to give you a decision, so you can't rely on them, but they're upside. And if there is a grant that's available for your business, then of course, do take a look and do bother filling in the form if it's not going to be too painful, and if the money that will come from it is enough to justify the expenditure of time. Perhaps we can go on to the next slide.
Yeah, just before we do, George, just on the one thing that interests me was when you're talking about the owner getting around or less than 20% after investments, and that being a bad thing for potentially the internal conversations. I wondered if you had a bit more sort of insight on that, because I think that's something which I definitely hadn't thought of, and maybe our attendees weren't thinking about either.
Yeah, so there are two separate points. So the first is, in the long run, you end up with much less of the business because there is this pressure to make the business as big as it can be. That requires taking extra capital, and that requires giving away more and more shares. So I know very, very few founders who, at the end of the journey, once the business is worth a lot of money, have anything like more than 20% of the business still. On the staff question, so as businesses get bigger and you have more and more high-powered staff, and you start hiring C-level staff, the nature of those individuals is that they are powerful individuals in their own right. I often take the view that you can define somebody who's ready to be called a C-suite executive as if the CEO was knocked over by a bus, anyone else in the C-suite ought to be big enough, credible enough that if necessary, they could take over and be CEO for a number of months without the business immediately exploding. Yeah. It wouldn't necessarily be the right person to be CEO forever, but they could cope for a while. And people of that nature, big hitters, will have different opinions about how the business should be run, and that's normal and natural. But in the situation that they're working for a boss who owns 100% of the company, then there is no question, there is no appeals process that that boss is in charge. In the situation where the CEO only owns 5 or 10% of the company, it's much easier for those big hitting C-level staff to say, well, that's the CEO's opinion. Maybe it can be challenged at the board, or maybe it can work round, or maybe it can be ignored. Now, some level of that is not necessarily a bad thing. In Apple, it was known that Steve Jobs would regularly veto something and then discover that his staff had secretly gone and worked on it anyway, and appeared 3 months later with something fantastic and pleased about it. So it's not always a bad thing for C-level execs to have their own opinions, but definitely the job of the CEO is made easier with the more authority they're perceived to have in the company.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
So I want to talk now about selling shares. If you do go down the path of selling shares, then there's different types of providers of what's known as equity capital at different stages. And first stage you're likely to use is friends and family, just people you already know, your rich uncle, or your mate who's made some money. And most likely, although I should emphasize that all the numbers you see on this slide are approximate, and there are exceptions to every rule, but most likely a friends and family round will be up to £150,000, which, by the way, is the most that you can cover with a tax scheme called SEIS, which is the special government scheme. We'll talk about it a bit more in a second, to give preferential tax treatment to very early stage entrepreneurial businesses. And for that, because they're your friends, most likely you'll only need some sort of a presentation. I guess you would have done a spreadsheet before as well, saying how much money you're going to make. And as I've written on the right of the slide, PITA, that stands for pain in the arse, and it means how much of a pain in the arse. And the answer is usually they will not be a pain in the arse. But I would emphasize this, given that most likely you're going to lose their money, you should absolutely make it clear upfront to them that that is the most likely expectation, and you should only take money from people whose money you are happy to lose. You might want to think about in this situation where the business doesn't go far, that over the years afterwards you would work out a way to pay back to your friends, and maybe for your friends that might be the right thing to do. But in the main, I would say to you, assume that you may well lose these people's money, and just check that that really is going to be okay. Next stage up from that, under another tax scheme called EIS, you might be going out to more conventional business angels, as they're called. So these are people who would invest between typically 20 and 100,000 pounds each. And so the round size will be 200 grand up to 100 million. And for that, normally you need a product that works and a team. It may still be at the demo stage. You may not have any customers necessarily. The word team, by the way, can be a bit frightening. It sounds like you need sort of 25 people in an office, and that really isn't it. It just means more than the founder. So if you can show you've got 1 or 2 other people who are going to act as co-founders or very early employees, the fact that you've recruited them is a positive indicator about you, assuming that they're not complete idiots. So that will make it more likely that you'll be able to raise that money. And EIS investors, in my experience, are not typically that difficult to work with, often because they are just busy. They're busy people. That's not the case in all situations. I had one EIS investor who used to phone me every Friday afternoon, mid-afternoon, unscheduled. And after a few weeks, I would ask him why it was that he always used to call me at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoons. And he said to me, well, it's because usually at this point in the week, I get a bit bored. Fancy it. This is not helpful for entrepreneurs. But in the main, most individuals don't have a lot of power, particularly in the later life of a business, once the individual shareholders are a smaller part of the total shareholding and venture capitalists are a larger part. But do be careful. Obviously, you might come across somebody who is an angel investor likes to throw their weight around, and it really isn't worth taking those people's money. If well, certainly not letting anyone near the board. If they're not on the board, they may not have very much power to throw their weight around, so it may not matter too much. After that are venture capitalists, and I've split them here between seed stage and what's known as Series A. Seed stage is defined by the size of the round. So these are institutions with other people's money, and typically, but not always, several partners controlling the fund. It will be a fund, and you might have a total round size of £2.5 million, £3 million. And for that, you will need customers and some indication of what it took to get those customers and what you hope the economics might be in the future. And beyond that is Series A. Now, Series A is the first of several levels of venture capital investment. The one you do after Series A will be called Series B, and the one you do after Series B will be called Series C, and so on. So that's what the letters mean. It's just about when they happened in the order. More than £4 million, you will need proven economics. You'll need to be doing what's called a run rate of $1 million per annum. That means that in the month that you're going, that's a bit less than $100,000 in that month, so it'll sum to $1 million in the year. And your economics, your revenue needs to be up of the order of $300,000 on the previous quarter if you're lucky. If your numbers are going that well, then you'll be in a good place to raise a Series A. Now, the other thing, and obviously those people I've given a big pain in the arse tick to, because these people are a professional pain in the arse, mainly because there's so much money at stake, and they care deeply about their personal and professional reputations if you don't do a good job of running your business. Also, they will expect that they can be value adding to your business, and their opinions will be value adding. My experience is that is not invariably the case, but they often do look to add value. So one way or the other, it's quite likely that they will be a pain in the arse, although it's definitely the case that there are many who aren't pains in the arse, but you need to be very careful. Finally, you should know that at all stages, there are people who will waste your time. They'll invite you in to come and pitch, and you'll tell them all about your clever ideas and plans, and then you'll get nothing out of it. So they will not invest in your business, and they may along the way have promised you introductions that don't materialize and so forth, all of which is disastrous, and it does happen at every stage. The two types that I find most egregious at the late stage in venture capital, it's where they invite you in to pitch, but actually they've already decided they're not terribly interested in investing in you. They're actually more interested in investing in your competitor for whatever reason, and they're using the opportunity to find out all of your secrets from you. And that is disgraceful, but it happens. At the other end of the scale, at the very early stage, there are occasional clowns knocking around who will initially present themselves to you as investors, but then after you've talked to them a little bit, they'll say something like, oh yeah, I'm not a cash investor, I'm a sweat equity investor. And what this means is that for their effort and for their genius, you should give them an amount of shares. And then they may say they'll connect you to someone else who might invest, but if that other person invests, then they want X amount of shares and so on. You should run away from those people. There has never been such a person who's ever been known to be significantly value adding. They are parasites, and you'd be surprised by how many of them are knocking around, and just don't go anywhere near them. You don't need them, and you can get the introductions you need in other ways. In terms of how much to raise, it's a big myth that you should raise as little as possible. The truth is, if you decide that you need to raise, it's very likely that the amount that you need to get onto the next stage will be more than you think you need, and possibly, by the way, more than your investors are actually willing to put in at that stage. So for most British businesses, most of the time, the maximum amount you can lay your hands on is usually the right amount, because in the main, British businesses don't have such great access to capital as happens, for example, in Silicon Valley, where, yes, those businesses may well be able to raise more than they need, in which case they should raise what they need, but I think for most British businesses, that's just not the case. It is very normal between investment rounds to run out of money as a business. So, you raise a few £100,000, you think that's going to be enough to take you to wherever you said you were going to be at the next investment round, and then things take a bit longer, it's just a bit harder in whatever way, and you need a bit more time, you're running out of money. That's a very normal scenario. And so it's useful if you have investors who are deep-pocketed, by which I mean rich, if they're individuals, but similarly funds that have keep a load of extra cash in the expectation that they will write you loans at the sometime after the original investment, between investment rounds, to just bridge you over that period. Finally, be wary of corporate investors, big blue chips who are relevant to what you do. It can be very tempting to get excited by the idea that if you're doing a retail startup, that some big retailer is going to invest in you, but they're going to be really slow to make that decision. They can be quite unpredictable. If they insist on putting someone on your board, it's likely that it won't be somebody who's experienced in operating on startup boards and may throw their weight around in some unhelpful ways. And it may also cripple future fundraisings, because a future investor may not be willing to invest in a company which already has a major shareholder who's one of their competitors, for example. So for all these reasons, I would be wary of corporate investors. Perhaps we can move on to the next slide. So I talked before about tax structures, and I just want to give a little bit more detail on that now in this final slide from me. Just to say that if you possibly can get tax advantages for your investors in the early days of business, then you should. And there are some very generous tax advantages available. Now, the information you see on here comes from Crowdcube, the crowdfunding website, and it's I think it's a couple of years old, so it's worth checking these numbers with your accountant before you use these schemes now. But the schemes, which are the Enterprise Investment Scheme and the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, both exist to support early stage businesses doing something entrepreneurial. And they have the following characteristics: that when an individual angel, and it also has to be an individual, invests under these schemes, they can invest up to the maximums I've shown here, £1 million or £100,000, depending on the scheme. Companies can receive up to different amounts of money under these schemes, but the individuals receive improvements in their income tax immediately, and also tax relief if the company fails, and so forth, such that in total they just aren't risking anywhere near as much money as it initially looked like. So they might only be risking, you know, of the order of 30, 35%, 38% of the money they put in. If they put in £100,000 and, you know, they're only exposed to £27,500 worth of losses if it all goes wrong. Now, that obviously makes a huge difference for investors' willingness to invest in your business. And when you've got that for your investors, it means that you're really doing them a big favor letting them invest. Because while it is true that most likely your business will fail, if your business succeeds, they look likely to make a 20 times return on a win. And you're letting somebody have the opportunity to make a bet with a 20 times return, but only a 1 times loss of money if they fail. And so that's a great bet. You're giving them a great opportunity. Because of that, in my view, if your business does fail and you've got them these tax advantages, and you put everything into making your business work, which I'm sure you would do, then you really shouldn't feel guilt when your business fails and they lose their money, because most likely they knew the odds, and anyway, their downside really wasn't that great.
Amazing. Fantastic, George. Thank you so much for those few slides. I think that's given our attendees some real insights and really useful information on, you know, starting their investment journey for sure. We're going to move on in a second just to the resources, some of which you've already mentioned. But just want to give our attendees a quick reminder about Tide. And if you are new to us, please do head over to our website and have a look. If that's a bit too much effort for you, in the next couple of days, you'll all receive an email from us with a link to rewatch this webinar. You can share that with your friends and colleagues. And on that email, if you're not one of our 200,000 members, you'll also have a link allowing you to sign up and start saving yourself time and money. All you'll need to do is click on that link, download the wonderful Tide app, which I talked about earlier, follow the very easy instructions, and then you'll be able to start using Tide for all your business banking needs. For all the links to our previous masterclasses and information about our upcoming events, please visit our blog and our events page, links to which you'll find in the chat room, which I'll put in there now. If you are watching on YouTube, they'll be in the description underneath the video. We also, of course, have a YouTube channel. If you're watching us, that's great, and all the information will be below on the description. If you want to find our YouTube channel, the link for that is in our chat room if you're watching this live as well. So go and subscribe and like and follow and stay up to date with all of information about Tide. So George, if you maybe want to just run through these resources which you'd mentioned previously in the masterclass, that'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. So there's just 3. So the first one is a big list of all the grants and funding that may be available to your business. It's worth checking out. As I say, in most cases, most businesses can't get any grants, but worth just taking a look. The second one is a big list by a venture capitalist called Fred Destin of all the major seed venture funds in the UK. It can be hard to find the names of all the different funds that might make an investment at the seed stage, so do use that list. And the third is the information that I referenced from Crowdcube about the Enterprise Investment Scheme and the SEIS scheme as well, just so you can check that the information is up to date. And it's worth double checking that, as I mentioned, with your accountant to make sure that what you tell your investors is indeed still correct.
Brilliant. Really, really useful resource. Thank you again, George. So yeah, that's today's masterclass. Thank you all for attending. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Please do stay up to date with everything on our channel. For those who are watching you live, if you have any ideas about future events or speakers, please do put those into the chat room. Again, on YouTube, write those in the comments for us. At the end of this webinar, a survey will pop up once I hit the end of the webinar. Please do take that survey to give us some ideas about future topics and speakers. We always want to hear from you guys about what you want us to cover. But for now, that's it. George is going to join us for our next masterclass on Thursday about how to approach investors. And so we'll look forward to that. But for now, George, thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to speaking to you again later in the week.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks so much.